Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Shirley Hernandez. I'm a work-based learning coordinator here for MDUSD. And today we have Heather Soto. So I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Perfect. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully everybody logged on or getting on with a little bit of technical difficulties this morning, but I'll jump right into it. First and foremost, I'm excited to talk to you all because I'm not just somebody who is in the hospitality industry who's sharing my story, but a little over 20 years ago, I was one of you. I went through the Serendipity program. Chef Kevin was my teacher. Mrs. Moon, who was the baking and pastry instructor, was also my teacher. And when I was a junior and senior in high school, I actually was going to Northgate High School in Walnut Creek, but I would drive for 2 periods to come to Serendipity and do the hospitality program. And the reason why was because I was always interested in food, even from a young age. Loved to cook, loved to bake, loved to eat out, loved everything about restaurants and the restaurant industry. And I was seriously considering going to culinary school after high school. But I was like a super geek, ultra nerd, AP kind of student. And all of my, not only my parents, but my teachers were like, you want to go to culinary school? Are you sure about this? Like, is that really what you want to do? And I kept saying, yeah, like food is what I'm passionate about. This is really what I want to do. And so I heard about Serendipity and the hospitality program at Mount Diablo High. And so I said, you know, I got to figure out a way to join that so I can give it a test run and see if, you know, this is really my career path. And so Serendipity and those 2 years at Mount Diablo were like really instrumental in confirming that, yes, this is the industry for me. Hospitality and restaurants are it. This is what I want to do with my career. And this is something that I'm exceptionally passionate about. And because of that experience, I ended up, you know, continuing in the industry. So after Serendipity, so junior, senior year in high school, I enrolled at the Culinary Institute of America, which is in Hyde Park, New York. There's a campus, of course, in wine country in St. Helena, Greystone as well now, and another one in Napa at the Copia Center. But at the time, there was only the main campus in New York. So this is, you know, more than 20 years ago now. And so I went through the baking and pastry program at the CIA, and you had to choose culinary or baking and pastry. And I really enjoyed both, but I chose baking and pastry because it was more technical and because I felt like from a kind of science standpoint, there was more science behind it that would be harder to just pick up than if I had done culinary. But I was really torn. Luckily at the CIA, if you're doing the pastry track, you also have a lot of exposure and you are required to take a lot of culinary classes. Just like if you're doing the culinary degree, you also have a bunch of pastry classes you take as well. So you get exposure to both. But culinary school is really expensive and the CIA is really expensive. And I didn't come from a wealthy family, so I was determined to not get into a bunch of debt with loans or whatever. And I found out that the CIA gave a scholarship every quarter to the student who had the highest GPA, and they would pay for your next quarter's education. And as soon as I found that out, I was just like, I'm going to be top of the class every quarter so that my education is paid for. And so the reason why I'm telling you that is I don't want anyone to think that culinary school is off limits for anybody. There are grants and scholarships based on academics, based on background, based on if you're the first person to go to college, based on if you're going to be the first college graduate in your family, based on ethnicity. There's a ton of scholarships and grants out there. So don't let that deter you from going to the school of your dreams. I just really want to stress that, because my situation is going to sound like, oh, she had all this privilege. And I want you to know that, like, I was really determined and competitive to make sure that I got the scholarships and grants I needed to make my education happen the way I wanted it to. So I went to the CIA and graduated from the Baking and Pastry Associates program, top of my class. And then I decided to, there's a internship period between the associates and the bachelor's degree if you continue for that. And I came back to California and I worked at Chez Panisse in Berkeley as a pastry chef. And that was a really good experience, practical restaurant experience in a more fine dining setting. And at the time, Alice Waters was still in the kitchen, and there were some now big name chefs who've gone on and opened restaurants, but I was working with them, before they were well known. So that was really cool. And then I went on and got back to the CIA in New York and did my bachelor's degree in hospitality management. And that was where the focus was obviously not on the practically in the kitchen anymore, but it was on the finances of running a restaurant, the marketing plan for opening a restaurant, statistics about what dishes are successful on menus and why, a lot of really practical things that are very helpful if you're going to be a restaurateur, but even if you're just going to work in a restaurant, to have a more holistic view. But also, there were people in the program who weren't going into restaurants. They were more interested in hotels or becoming an F&B director on a cruise ship. And so the hospitality bachelor's degree was good at kind of showing all of those avenues as well, and giving us a lot of overview of the different paths you could take within hospitality. So at the end of the bachelor's program, I was kind of figuring out, okay, what do I want to do next? And having worked at Chez Panisse and done, practical pastry experience, that was really fun for me. But in the bachelor's program, there was more of a focus on, okay, long-term career goals. And I wasn't sure I wanted to be in the kitchen strictly for 20 years as a pastry chef. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do yet. I really enjoyed it, but I wasn't sure. And so I thought I should get some more restaurant experience. So I worked at a restaurant in San Leandro called Paradiso. But then I also worked at Cisco, the food service company, as a marketing salesperson. And really that was interesting because I was going around every day driving to 20, 30 different restaurants, taking their orders for their inventory, and also promoting new products that Cisco was trying to push or they were trying to introduce to chefs. And it was really interesting to see all the different restaurants, what kind of products were selling, what kind of dishes were popular, and just have a view of everything from like a little taqueria in Oakland, a pizzeria, to a Sichuan restaurant in San Francisco. I was going all over the Bay Area, and it was a lot of, it was a really good learning experience, but it also allowed me to save up some money to go to grad school, because I had the thought that I wanted to continue my education because that would open more doors for me. And I thought, okay, I want to get a master's, an MBA, master's in business administration, but I want to do this at a school that has hospitality as a focus, because I know that my industry is still hospitality. But I want to get a grad degree because there aren't that many people in hospitality, frankly, who have graduate or higher degrees. There's a lot of people who have associate's degrees, maybe some who have bachelor's, but MBAs and doctorates are very, very few and far between. So I wanted to stand out and make sure that I, had as much, I guess, possibility in my future, as much opportunity as possible. So I looked into hospitality programs, MBAs that had hospitality focuses. And of course, Cornell University in New York is really the hotel school there, which is world famous, has an MBA program with an international hospitality focus. And so I was really excited and thinking, okay, I'm going back to New York. I was in New York for culinary school. I'm going to be back in New York for grad school. But when I applied, they asked, do you speak any languages? I should have mentioned this besides English. I should mention this earlier, but I knew I always was interested in food from a young age. And so in middle school, when we had to pick German, Spanish, or French, I picked French. Most people were picking Spanish. They're like, oh, that's way more practical in California. But for me, I picked French because I knew that was the language of food and culinary terms and pastry terms. And so I took French all through middle school, all through high school, and even through culinary school, CIA. I took French classes, advanced French classes. So when I applied for Cornell, I put that I was conversant in French, which was true. And they reached out to me and they said, hey, look, one student out of our Cornell acceptance pool every year gets selected as a candidate for IMI, IMHI. And that's the International Hospitality Management Institute at a school called ESSEC. ESSEC is the initials. It stands for something in French, which essentially means a French economic business school. And you would be getting an MBA from both Cornell and ESSEC at the same time. You'd get a dual MBA, and it would be accredited in the US and in Europe, but you would have to move to Paris and do your grad school there. And I was like, yeah, sign me up. So I was the student who was selected, and I ended up doing my MBA in hospitality management, international hospitality management at ESSEC in Paris in this IMI program. And what was really cool about my MBA was living in Europe and eating and traveling to all these different European countries, because I mean, it was really easy to go on a train from France to Belgium to Switzerland to Luxembourg. I mean, in a day, it's just a few hours. If you look at the size of Europe on a map, and then like the size of California, you realize like for us to go drive from the Bay Area to Vegas is farther than to go from Paris to the Netherlands. And so I was spending all of my free time traveling and eating and being exposed to different cuisines all over Europe. And that was really important for me as from an educational standpoint and for what came next in my career. So the IMI program, this MBA program, had something called the Industry Leader Series. And it's essentially like what I'm doing right now, speaking to you as students, trying to give you some insight into what future career possibilities could be. They did that for us. And so there was someone who came who, and these were all general companies. It wasn't necessarily hospitality. My MBA had a hospitality focus, but there were people from all different industries who came because the MBA students, not all of them had a hospitality focus. So we had people coming from the airline industry. We had people coming from tech. We had people coming from design firms and architecture firms. But one of the speakers was a man named Jean-Luc Naret, who was the then director of the Michelin Guides. And so I'm going to just briefly explain what the Michelin Guides are, because if you were like me, you didn't have a clue when you were in high school what the Michelin Guides were. Maybe some of you do, but I didn't. And what the Michelin Guides are a collection of guidebooks that recommend the best restaurants in the major cities of the world. There's also country guides, so like a guide to France, a guide to Italy, and they are guides that are in Europe, Asia, and North America at this point. There are expansion plans to South America, Southeast Asia, but at this point it's Europe, Asia, and North America. And how the guides work. Let me first explain. Everybody probably has heard of Michelin. Michelin, everybody thinks, oh yeah, the American tire company. First, let me tell you, it's not American. It's a French company, and everybody knows about the tires because that makes billions. And you see Michelin tires everywhere in advertisements, and you see what we call the Michelin man, but his name really is Bibendum in French, the little white puffy guy with all the rolls. But Michelin is a French tire company, very profitable French tire company. And in the 1900s, they thought, we need to get customers to wear out their tires and drive more so that we can sell more tires. So in 1900, they started a guide to France, and basically they had these Michelin employees who had come from, that they hired out of the restaurant industry, put together a list of all the places you wanted to stay or eat in all of these different small villages around the French countryside. And the idea was, okay, if people are driving to try these little restaurants and cafes that we're recommending, they're going to drive more and will sell more tires because they're going to wear out their tires. So that was the marketing strategy. But over the years, this little niche division of Michelin became like the most important from a brand standpoint, luxury division of Michelin. And what I mean by that is there was criteria developed and a star system developed. They were the first ones to assign stars to restaurants. And so in the Michelin system, there's 1-star, 2-star, and 3-star for restaurants. And 3 is the most you can get. Just to be in the Michelin Guide, to be a restaurant that's listed in the guide, means that you are one of the best restaurants by far in your area. If you get a 1 Michelin, so just to be in the guide is a big deal. But then if you get a star, that's a huge deal. 2 stars, it's like world class, and 3 stars, people are flying from all over the world to eat at your restaurant. And so when we're talking about 1, 2, or 3-star restaurants, we're talking about like destination, people save up for years to go there once in their life, or if you're a billionaire, you might go there multiple times a year. But these are kind of that kind of level restaurants. And so Michelin became, the way best to describe it is like the Michelin inspectors go anonymously and eat at all of these restaurants. Nobody knows who they are. They go with fake names, fake IDs, fake phone numbers, fake email addresses. There's no way to trace them because they want to have an authentic guest experience. And then they assess the restaurant, and after multiple meals by multiple inspectors, there's a decision made whether it's just in the guide, whether it's in with 1, whether it's in with 2 or 3 Michelin stars. And so this whole system I kind of learned about while I was in grad school. And I had a Michelin Guide to France and a Michelin Guide for a lot of the other main cities in Europe. And so that's what I was doing in my free time. I was eating at a 1-star or a 2-star. I saved up for 1 3-star, but that's all I could afford was 1. But I wanted to try all of these restaurants and see what makes it a 3-star, what makes this a 2-star, what makes this a 1-star. And then there's a category called Bib Gourmand, and a Bib for short, BIB. And a Bib was something that was an inspector's favorite, where you could eat for 40 euros or less. And that meant three courses for 40 euros or less. So those were the more affordable ones. And so I tried as many of these restaurants as I could because I really was like excited about, this system and these restaurants and trying all of these places that were like already proven to be amazing. So back to Jean-Luc Naret, who was the guest speaker, he came and he was the director of the Michelin Guides. And he came and spoke to us about how the Michelin system worked and how, the integrity behind it because the inspectors were anonymous, and explained the whole thing. And I was raising my hand like, hey, hey. And I was really the only one who was super excited that he was there. And I asked him, like, why hasn't Michelin come to the United States? We have restaurants that are amazing up in wine country. We have restaurants in New York that are amazing, in San Francisco, in Chicago. And so he was kind of like smirking and, you know, like he had some kind of secret that he wasn't really going to tell me, but, you know, he was excited about my enthusiasm, and he gave me his business card and he said, when you graduate, email me. And so at the end of my MBA, that's exactly what I did. I pestered him and pestered him, and it took a long time for him to get back. And what happened was he kept forwarding my emails to a North American hiring program because Michelin was coming to the United States, and it hadn't been announced yet, and they were assembling their first team of inspectors. And so while I was waiting for Michelin to respond, I worked briefly in Beijing in China for a French restaurant company in restaurant development. They were opening some French bistros in China. But then I kept emailing Michelin because I was like, this is my dream job to do, be a Michelin inspector. Like, this is what I want to do. So after a lot of pestering and lots of emails, finally I got a response, and they had me fly to San Francisco, and I met with who I found out later was an inspector, but I didn't know. Everybody had, you know, fake names with me because they didn't want to reveal their identity. So I just knew that I was going to meet with Jacques in this lobby of this hotel at this time. His name turned out not to be, after I was hired, it wasn't his real name. But so they asked me, you know, how comfortable are you dining alone? How comfortable are you going to be traveling, you know, every week, driving thousands of miles a year, traveling to, you know, 20 different countries. You're going to be eating like 400 meals, lunch and dinner every day, Monday through Friday, and writing reports on these meals. It's a very lonely, solitary life. You can't tell anybody what you're doing. You can't tell your family what you're doing. You have to be completely anonymous. You have to have a cover story to explain why you're traveling so much and why you're alone all the time. Are you comfortable with that? And I was like, this is great. For sure, you know, I want to do this. And so they hired me. I was sent to France to train, and essentially it's a lot of palate testing the first year to make sure that you have not only the culinary and pastry background, but also the palate sensitivity to detect nuance in food and in flavor, because some people just don't. And so frankly, just because you're hired by Michelin doesn't mean you're going to be a year from hire, a year after training, a full-fledged inspector. There's a kind of a long testing period to make sure your palate is trustworthy, and that your understanding of different cuisine types is on par with the other inspectors who have lots more years of experience. So there was a long training period, a lot of palate testing, a lot of eating out with the senior inspectors, and writing lots of reports, hundreds and hundreds of hours of reports, detailing everything from the temperature of the dish, the seasoning, the ingredients, how it was plated, how it was served, the ambiance in the restaurant, the silverware, the timing of the meal, if there was a lull between courses. I mean, everything you can think of is detailed. And then after a year of training, I was a full-fledged Michelin inspector, and I was an inspector for 11 years. The North American team, we launched all of the guides that currently exist in the United States. So New York was first. That was 2005, and that was also when I was hired. 2006 was San Francisco, then Chicago, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, Las Vegas all came in a couple years later. And then the last guide I worked on was the California guide, which launched the year I resigned. So that came out, and so that's in 2018 because I left in 2017. And the reason why I left a dream job, really it was a dream job, was because after I was with Michelin for about 8 years, I got married. I met my husband when I was working as an inspector, not in my home city, but I met him through friends, and we got married, and then I had a child. And when I had my son, I realized, you know, this job and all of this travel, 3 weeks out on the road, minimum a month, was really difficult with balancing with motherhood. And so I made the choice to resign from Michelin, even though there was, you know, it really was an amazing experience, but just so that I could be with my family, spend more time. I didn't want to miss out on my child's childhood. I didn't want to miss out on, you know, bringing him to kindergarten and picking him up early and having lunch with him and all of those things that were going to fly by so quickly. So in 2017, I left Michelin, and that was kind of a big deal because inspectors don't leave. And so there was a lot of inspectors who were like, what are you doing? You know, once you leave and you tell people that's what you did, that's it. Your cover is blown. You're no longer anonymous. Your face is known, so you can never come back. But for me, it really worth it to transition to having time with my family. And so currently, since 2017, I have been a restaurant and food product consultant. And what that means is I get hired by, for example, a luxury resort company that's based in wine country wanted me to test their restaurants and all of come through as a guest and test their restaurants, see their F&B operations, see where the areas for improvement, give feedback to their chefs. So that's one avenue of consulting I do. But then I've also worked with food product companies. Like an example would be, there's a chai machine startup. So just like there are espresso machines, coffee machines, this startup is 2 engineers who left Google and are have built a chai machine, like an espresso machine, that does masala or spiced chai. So it's a tea and spice blend that's infused, and then for a warmed milk is added in. And they want to have that as like a mass market product, like, you know, Nespresso or any of these coffee machines. And so I worked with them to help improve their product, because they were having issues with the heat of the water not being enough to let the cardamom pods soften enough to get enough cardamom, or the balance between ginger and cardamom was off. Like all of the flavor nuance is where I came in to work with them. That's an example from a product standpoint. And then also I have been teaching. So examples are like seminars. So I was flown to Singapore to give a baking and pastry workshop over the course of a weekend. And that was for enthusiastic amateur home bakers who were trying to start home baked goods businesses, basically selling online, but they didn't have any kind of formal culinary pastry background. And so I was a consultant who gave this seminar to kind of jumpstart their businesses. So that's what I've been doing for the last few years. Of course, this last year has been really weird with the pandemic. Right now, everybody's in survival mode. I'll be honest. The hospitality industry has been battered. A lot of really well-known, famous restaurants have closed just because they couldn't survive, you know, the lack of business. They didn't have the reserves and finance to stay open. So there's been this whole shift these last few months with restaurants in particular, but hotels too. Everybody's struggling during this pandemic. So my consulting has kind of frankly tapered off a little bit, and that's just because the industry's in survival mode. And luckily I'm in a situation where I'm fine, but there's a lot of people who are kind of reassessing what they're going to do next. And even for me, once this pandemic's over, it's very tone deaf for me to come out and approach these two-star chefs and say, hey, you want to hire me? I can help you get 3 stars. Like that, they're not even thinking about that. They're just trying to keep their business open, their restaurant open. The focus on, what kind of awards you're getting or your recognition is not at all even in the, hemisphere right now. So for me, post-pandemic, I think I'm going to be doing a lot more coaching and consulting as far as streamlining businesses, getting them as profitable as quickly as possible. There's a lot of restaurateurs who have great food, but they don't have the business knowledge to back it up. And so there's a lot of help needed there. So I think my focus is going to have to kind of switch to that at short term, and of course still like product consulting. So that's what I've been up to, and that's a whirlwind 35-minute intro to my career path. But that's been what I've done since I was a student at Serendipity 20-something years ago. So I just I guess I'll open it up for questions. Really quickly before I do, I want to show you one picture, just so you see what I'm talking about. These are the guides that I worked on, a few of them. These are not all of them. So I was hired in 2005. I got the tail end of the France guide and the bottom 2004, because that's when I was training. And then I have guides all the way through 2018 that I worked on, because I left in 2017, but we were already working on the 2018 edition. But these are some of the cities, but also I worked, of course, in Asia and Europe as well. I was based in the US, but I would also, fly to Japan or fly to Amsterdam to support the inspectors there, because we all moved around a lot to make sure that one city wasn't just an American inspector's perspective. There might be a Japanese inspector who flew in, a Chinese inspector, a French inspector. So anyway, I was flying around like crazy too. All right, so I guess we'll open it up for questions.
I can read the questions off to you.
Perfect.
So how much does a food critic earn on a yearly basis, or maybe starting?
Okay, so that has greatly improved from when I was hired. When I was hired, I can tell you that Michelin was just starting in the US, and they hired me $55,000 a year. That was my starting salary. And that seems fine, but when you're living in the Bay Area, after a while, that's tough. And luckily, salaries have improved. I can only speak about Michelin. I can't talk about if you were San Francisco Chronicle, food reporter, or you worked for the Los Angeles Times. I can only talk about Michelin. But that has greatly improved since then. And now it's a pretty good salary. It's probably close to double that if you're a senior inspector.
Where was your favorite food experience? Or what is your favorite?
I get that question all the time. Like, what's your favorite dish, or what's your favorite cuisine type? And that's so hard. You have to realize, like, I've been to thousands of restaurants, thousands, all over the world. And it's so impossible for me to say, like, what my single favorite dish is. But I can talk about cuisine types, because I definitely have favorite cuisine types. I love Japanese and Japanese omakase sushi. So this isn't like, California rolls. I'm talking about like when you're sitting at a counter in Tokyo and the chef just gives you whatever is the freshest fish that they've gotten that day off boats. Japanese, Thai, I tend to really enjoy Southeast Asian, Japanese, Thai, Vietnamese, Indian, Pakistani, Southeast Asian and Asian cuisines, Chinese, and I don't mean just like Chinese general, but Sichuan, Chengdu, Hunan, certain regional Chinese cuisines. And then I really love like regional Mexican cuisine. My husband's family is from Jalisco, Oaxaca. Like I really like, you can't generalize and just be like, oh, I like Chinese food, I like Mexican food. You really have to break it down by regions. But also Argentinian food or Chilean food. Like there's a lot of South American cuisines that have not yet like made it mainstream, but really amazing food. And then if we talk about in this country, we're really blessed to be in California where there's amazing produce. You know, when I was inspecting in Chicago, for example, it would be like half a cow on a plate and like some potatoes and like really, you know, Midwest kind of food. And so then I'd come back to California and be like, oh, finally something green. But Californian cuisine really is a unique thing as far as making the most of seasonal produce. And of course, I had that background at Chez Panisse, which was like the front runner for this Californian cuisine movement in the 70s. But there's really something to be said for that and the level of like vegetable cooking and vegetarian options in California. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers.
You traveled a lot with this, when you were with Michelin Guides. So who paid for your transportation?
Michelin, entirely. I did not pay for flights, hotels. If I got a water bottle at the corner, you know, because for my hotel room, they paid for that. Everything, all of my expenses were paid for. Because that is part of the job. You are flying, eating, dining, traveling, staying at hotels, all on Michelin's payroll. And so there was expense reports. Of course, everything had to be documented, you know, what you spent. But these were really, a lot of these meals were super expensive, and thank goodness they were paying.
Chef Kevin asked how much to eat in a 3-star restaurant.
So that's interesting. That's changed a little bit through the years too. It used to be that we were talking like $300 minimum, and it goes up a lot from there. And we can, you know, there's restaurants where it's a few thousand a person for a meal. These are tasting menus that might, you know, 24 courses long, and it's like a 4-hour meal, 5-hour meal sometimes. But there are also now, Michelin is kind of over the years recognize that not everything is a traditional tasting menu format or needs to be in order for it to be amazing 3-star level food. So there are restaurants that are more affordable. Still, you're going to be up over 100, 150 a person, but they're no longer these crazy tasting menus. There are even some 3 stars. I'm thinking off the top of my head. So there was a restaurant in New York City called Jean-Georges, which was 3 stars. And at dinner time, you're probably spending about $400 a person with tax and tip. But they had a 3-course lunch menu. And because New York, you know, has a big business big business lunch crowd, they had a 3-course, you got an appetizer, main, dessert. And I think it was $65, it might have gone up to $80 a person, but it was at a 3-star level. So I would always, you know, recommend to friends, not as a Michelin inspector, because they didn't know I was a Michelin inspector, but I would say, hey, you know, if they're going to New York and they knew I like to eat out, I'd be like, you need to go to Jean-Georges for lunch, because you can have an amazing meal and be out, you know, have a 3-star experience. I wouldn't say that, but they could have a 3-star experience for less than $100 instead of, you know, more than, you know, 4 times the price at dinner. So there are ways to dine out at Michelin starred restaurants where it's not break the bank. And especially at a 1-star or 2-star level, in the Bay Area, there's a lot of 1-star options that are, you know, $100 a person, which is still a lot, but it's not, you know, thousands a person.
Did you always know you wanted to do what you were doing now?
Did I always what? Sorry, I didn't hear.
Did you always know you wanted to do what you are doing now?
Yes, I always knew I was going to be doing something for sure in food, that I was going to be involved with restaurants and hospitality. I knew that from a young age, that this was my industry. This is what I'm passionate about. I didn't know about the Michelin Guides when I was a student at Serendipity. I'd never even heard of them. They weren't even in the US yet. And it wasn't until I was in Europe where I learned about Michelin that ended up being a career option. And then I was really determined, okay, I want to do this. I'm going to make this happen. And then when I left Michelin, I knew I was still going to be involved in the industry in some way. And so consulting has worked, while I'm kind of in this transition of being mom to a young child. But once he's in school longer hours, I do have a few things like I'm thinking of doing on my own startup wise, but yeah, that's probably in a year or two.
What was the best part about being an inspector? Was it fun to go and eat under a secret identity?
Super fun. Super fun. Because you have to realize, like, you're the only person who knows who you are, right? You're at a restaurant and you, like, for example, you make your reservations way in advance, because some of these, like the French Laundry takes 3 months to try and get a reservation. Masa in New York, the same thing. There's some restaurants that have like ticketing lottery systems. So you build your travel schedule around when you get reservations at those tricky places. And then let's hypothetically, I got a reservation on Wednesday night at the French Laundry. So then I would book a week in San Francisco or in the Bay Area, or preferably up near in wine country, so I wasn't driving like crazy. Lunch and dinner Monday through Friday, around that reservation Wednesday night at the French Laundry. And I would have a planner with all my restaurants, reservation times, and the name I used, because I was using fake names. I had aliases, because if Heather, at the time before I was married, I was Heather Travis, but then halfway through I was Heather Soto. So I couldn't put my name down, because then if somebody suspected something and whispered to other chefs, hey, have you had someone come in under this reservation name? She came in by herself. She ate by herself. She ate a lot for somebody, who's dining by themselves. She ordered like way too much food or whatever. I didn't want to be traced, and I couldn't be, because if my identity got leaked, my career would be over. So we had alias names, and then I would get one of these from Target. I get one of these flip phones, like T-Mobile, where you could change the SIM card, and I would change my phone number like every few days with the SIM card, so that my phone number was not traceable, because they call back to confirm your reservation. Well, I didn't want them to have my real phone number. And same thing, I have like so many fake email addresses that I would recycle, like all of these crazy names at Hotmail, at Gmail, at Yahoo, just so that I could have email confirmations that couldn't be tied to me. So I had to keep track of all of this. So it was very fun, because you're like a spy. You really are. There's no danger involved. There's no weapons involved. There's just really good food involved. So it was a very fun experience.
That sounds like it sounds like a spy. What does it mean to be an inspector?
So it means that you are an arbiter of taste, really. You are setting the standard for what is the best cuisine available in the world, the best restaurants in the world. You're the one who's handing out that award. You're the one, to put it in like perspective of film, you're giving the Oscar out, and it's your decision if this restaurant is winning the Oscar, if they're winning the star or 2 stars or 3 stars. And that can make or break a chef's career, really. And so it's something that's taken super seriously. Like the inspectors, it's not based ever on one meal. It was never just based on one inspector's experience. There'd be multiple inspectors who went to that restaurant throughout the year to test the experience. And we wrote really detailed, hours of reports, really detailed reports. And then we would all sit together, and it would sometimes get heated, our debates. There might be a chef who's really insistent that it was a 2-star experience. An inspector insisted it was a 2-star experience. And two others that said, no, it's a 3-star experience. And there'd be, you know, really heated discussion because no decision was ever taken lightly, because you are affecting not only that restaurant, that chef, but all the people who work under that chef. So there's a lot to be a Michelin inspector. You have to be really focused on detail, pay attention to every, not just about the food, but every single aspect of the experience, from booking the reservation to when you left, and really impartial and fair, because you can't have any personal preference, like, oh, this chef is, from the same hometown as my mom, and I really want her to get 2 stars because it would be really great if someone from my hometown had 2, like, you cannot have any personal, subjective, anything weigh in, because it needs to be as unbiased as possible. And so to be an inspector, a Michelin, I'm talking from the Michelin system, it's really important to have integrity, because that's what the whole Michelin rating system is built on.
So I think this will be our last 2 questions.
Okay.
Did you have to train yourself to be able to eat so much food? And then how do you manage your weight while eating so much?
So it was rough in the very beginning. I think my stomach did have to definitely expand, like just physically expand and stretch out to accommodate some of these tasting menus. So the first few weeks I was kind of uncomfortable, really. But then I guess my body kind of adjusted with that. As far as managing weight, I did not snack ever. My routine in the morning would be, I would get up and I would have a coffee, and really that was it. And that was while I was working on my report, finishing my report from the dinner the night before. And then I would not eat anything until I had my lunch inspection meal. And then I would go back to my hotel, wherever I was in the world, and I would write the report for that. And then I would
Heather, I think you froze.
stopped me for a second. Sorry. Are we all still here? Yeah. So let me just, so I would, if I could get in a quick, like, some kind of physical activity, usually it was just walking to the next restaurant. But I was really strict with no snacking. And on the weekends, it was like salads and really light food to kind of detox from all of the heavy food during the week. But also I kind of lucked out with genetics. I have 2 thin parents, and so that was an advantage for me. There's some inspectors who are on cholesterol medicine and get up at 4 in the morning and are at the hotel gym running 5 miles, and that's what they have to do to stay in shape. I lucked out where that didn't have to be the case for me, but you have to be regimented.
Well, thank you so much, Heather. This was really a really fun experience. We're so grateful to come and talk to our students and to our old high school teacher, Chef Kevin. But thank you so much.
Hey, hi, Chef.
Thank you so much.